All right, Alexander, let's do a Q&A from the live stream with Robert Barnes. And let's begin with Commando Crossfire. Venera 9 was the first probe to capture pictures from the surface of another planet, Venus. To this day, the only probe able to land and take pictures of Venus were the Soviet Venera probes in '82.
Certainly true. Yeah. I don't know why, by the way. I'm sure the US has the capability to do that. I mean, technology having moved on quite a lot since '82. But I don't know why the Soviets seem to focus on Venus at the same time as the US was focusing on Mars at about that time. And I'm going to say something else. I mean, for everything that I remember from that time, Venus sounds like a horrible place. Hideous pressures, horrible temperatures, poisonous atmosphere. You wouldn't survive very long.
Mark Hewitt says, how much involvement did Biden and the Democrats have in the downfall of Kwarteng and Truss?
That's a very good question. I'm going to say what I think about this, which is, of course, this is something I can only guess. I don't know. But I've no doubt that there was a plot. I mean, I said that at the time. Governor of the Bank of England came out, set the whole sequence of events moving with a statement telling pension funds, British pension funds, to leave the gilt markets, the government bond markets, by basically 4 days. Get them 3 to 4 days to pull out of the gilt markets, which of course created financial turmoil and provoked a crisis, which brought down first Kwarteng and then Truss. Now, I can't believe that a plot like that is carried out in Britain, in the UK, without the US, without Washington being consulted. Now, who in Washington was consulted, whether the Democrats were consulted, whether Biden was consulted, whether, the deep state was consulted. Well, I'm sure the deep state was consulted. I mean, bear in mind that the Five Eyes alliance works all the time, and that the British and American intelligence exchange ideas all the time. But, exactly who was informed and who was in on the picture, I don't know for a fact. But I am pretty sure that the US at some level was involved. But that's, a deduction, if you like, an inference, if you prefer. It's not something I factually know.
Sharad Kidney, thank you for that super sticker. Melody Pearson says, greetings and blessings from the not very United Kingdom. Continue to maintain hope for the future of all of us.
Absolutely. We must never give up on hope. Yeah.
Jay Thomas says, please ask Barnes if lobbying is constitutional. I think banning lobbying may be a good start to bringing the American government to heel.
I believe that it is constitutional. And I'm going to say something further. Now, this is something which Robert Barnes is much better positioned to comment on than I can. And, I will mention this to him when we next speak to him. But I think that banning lobbying is probably unconstitutional. In other words, you'd have to change the Constitution to ban lobbying. I think that there's Supreme Court decisions up to and including possibly Citizens United, which make it very clear that the exercise of lobbying is an exercise of free speech and therefore is legal and constitutional and constitutionally protected. Now, that's my understanding of this. This is not something I'm at all expert about. I may be completely wrong, and we'll see what Robert Barnes has to say.
Kev's in the house says, did you chaps have any idea how deep Mr. Soros's fingers are in the whole charade? Love your work.
No, we don't. But again, I mean, he probably has some role. But Alex made some time ago a point, which I think is a good one, which is when we talk about Soros, there's the human being, there's the person, and then there is the things, the various machines, the NGOs, the funds, all of the sort of network of connections and things that operate and which he set up, some of which he set up, but some of which we all associate with him. And I think perhaps we should focus more on those than on the man himself. Some of those, undoubtedly, if you're talking about the events in Britain, they are deeply involved in all of this. I mean, some of the media in Britain, I know, take money from NGOs and things associated with that name. And I suspect some of the institutions we're talking about are probably have, connections with all of that sort of vast network of money, influence, and all the rest. So, perhaps better focus on that than on the individual himself, who is now an very old man, by the way.
Dan Fasciana says, best information available. Thank you, Don. Don Fasciana, thank you for that. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Denise Cervantes, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says, Herschel crushed University of Tennessee.
Well, this is
that,
something
Sparky.
I know nothing about. I'm afraid I listened to that.
Yeah,
I listened to that discussion with awe, but I'm afraid American football is absolutely, completely outside my field of expertise.
Mr. Wonderful says, the Duran and Mr. Barnes were staying up till 3 a.m. for. Thank you for that, Mr. Wonderful. More Money says, you think the Ukraine mess would have been started if Qatar was allowed to build its pipelines into Europe via Syria, Turkey, which was blocked by Putin?
Yes, I think it would have been. I know that there's a belief, and it's a widespread belief, and there's some truth to it, no doubt, that the neocons launched the coup in Ukraine in 2014 out of revenge for the fact that Putin blocked their missile and bombing attacks on Syria in 2013. I think there's some probable truth to that, and it may have dictated the timing. But the neocons are the neocons. Sooner or later, they'd have got involved in Ukraine. They'd have created the crisis there, the same crisis that we're seeing. I don't think that it would have changed developments very much. The trajectory of events was already set and would have been already set. Sooner or later, the neocons would have alighted on Ukraine because it was an obvious thing to do in order to weaken Russia.
Jean Jedi, thank you for that super chat. Lover of the Russian team, thank you for that super sticker. Jawed says, will Russia take out Zelensky or force him to surrender?
I think the second is probably more what they're looking to do. I've discussed in previous programs why I think that the Russians, for various reasons, probably would not want to try to kill the head of state of another country. They've never done that, by the way. I mean, I think it's a point to bear in mind. I mean, the Soviet Union never did it. Even in Stalin's time, they never sent assassins to kill the leader of another country in that kind of way. So, I mean, they didn't do it during the Second World War with the leader of Germany. So I don't think they're going to do it this time. I don't think it's their method of operation.
Jim Lissac says, you three are great. Why does no one ever read or reread Putin's 12-17-21 proposal to US and NATO?
No, I know. Why don't they? Well, because, of course, if they did read it, they might actually think that this man is quite different from what we're told, and perhaps he's actually making some intelligent and reasonable proposals, and that our entire policy is wrong. So the powers that be make sure you don't read it. You can find it. You have to go through his website too, but you can find it. But, you'd have to work very hard, and you'd have to know it was there, and you'd have to know to look for it.
Sparky says, go dogs. Thank you, Sparky, for that. Kyle, thank you for that super sticker. Mr. Wonderful says, Alexander, is President Putin giving his amazing annual 4-hour press conference with hundreds of journalists taking questions without notice this year?
Yes, he is. We were told a short time ago that he's indeed planning to give that kind of a news conference, and that there will be another telemarathon Q&A. It's inevitable. It's just It's just a question of timing. Probably, if I may make a guess, the usual time for that would be around either just before Christmas or early in the new year.
Dean Porter, thank you for that super sticker. Cynic in Chief says, Alexander, say Rockfin. Barnes was my gateway drug to the Duran.
Rockfin.
Rockford.
Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. I mean, I have an English pronunciation. Sorry.
Yeah. Shaura Shikar says, hello, are you two also of the opinion that Western media is playing up Iranian protests, whereas many of these protests are localized and also have little to do with women's rights?
Yes, I think they are playing them up. I'm not sure what's driving them. I'm sure there is some degree of external involvement. I'm also sure, by the way, Iran being Iran, that there are genuine grievances and people who are angry and who are coming out and protesting. I mean, I think, one mustn't assume that all protests always are controlled by outside forces. But I've contacted various people who would know, including some Iranians, including one particular Iranian who's a woman and very strongly opposed to the Iranian government. And she certainly thinks that these are localized protests, that they don't have a mass following in Iran, and that they don't really pose any kind of threat to the Iranian government.
Matlas X says, Alexander, 69 AD was known as the year of the four emperors. How many prime ministers will the UK have between Boris Johnson's departure and this time next year?
Well, who knows? I mean, the word at the moment is that Boris is coming back. So maybe we'll what goes round comes round. Maybe we'll be back to, was it 2? Because Boris and then Truss and then Boris again. But then, of course, if it's someone else, it'll be 3, and then we'll see how long that person lasts. We'll see how long Boris lasts if he comes back. So who knows? But more importantly, I mean, this Conservative government that came to office in 2010 has gone through 4 prime ministers. 4. Now, that is a very high turnaround for Britain.
Batsian, thank you for that super chat. Nick, thank you for that super sticker.
Actually, I
Alex,
correct it.
thank you for that.
It was 5 prime ministers, but never mind. Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss. We'll see.
Alex Glantz, thank you for that super sticker. Robin R, thank you for that super chat. Lenny Jenkins, thank you for that super chat. Awakening Little Rabbit says, thank you for speaking out for truth and thus being what Yeshua asked of us. Yeah. Thank you for that super chat. And Elza says, gentlemen, how big are the chances that there will be less important news to cover and you'll talk about history, film, and other topics as promised?
We long for the day. At the moment, no sign of that.
John, thank you for that super chat. Lani Yap, thank you for that super sticker. Frankie Boy says, Tulsi Gabbard lit a fuse. Have her on.
Well, we'd love to, I think.
Yeah.
It'd be very interesting.
Great to have her on. Yeah, absolutely. Simo Bothell, Missouri says, thanks for speaking truth to power, guys. I think you deserve a Pulitzer Prize, but you'll probably end up vilified by the MSM, which is ironically an honor in this day and age. Margar here in Missouri.
If I was ever offered a Pulitzer Prize, which there's no chance that I ever would be, but if I was, I'd return it. I wouldn't accept it. Not in light of some of the people and some of the reasons that people have been given Pulitzer Prizes. To me, it is as contaminated as the Nobel Peace Prize. I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. As far as I'm concerned, it's radioactive.
Brian, thank you for that super chat. Sharon Quidney, too, says, how are they going to spin it when Russia wins?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, apparently is saying that if Russia wins, it'll be the end of the West, so we must make sure that it doesn't happen. I don't know what they're going to say. I really don't know what they're going to say, but it's the greatest media machine that has ever existed in the history of time. They'll find some way. Don't be under any doubt about it. They'll find some explanation. It was sheer weight of numbers. It was the Iranians giving all those missiles and drones. It was the Chinese supplying the Russians with all the microchips. It was, bad people in Europe somehow interfering with things. They'll find some way to justify, to explain away what happened. They always do.
Or they simply won't report it.
Or they simply won't report it, It'll all fall into a memory hole, and, we don't talk about it anymore. I mean, who talks about Libya, for example, nowadays? Who talks about Libya?
Yeah.
Or Yugoslavia? I mean, a few people do, but even Russiagate. I mean, look at Russiagate. We've had the Danchenko trial, all of that, all kinds of important revelations. Who talks about those things? I mean, I mean, they have an enormous ability to just switch off a story.
Sparky says, Putin's a righteous man, wrongly maligned by the MSM at the behest of the globalists for at least 15 years. In reality, Putin's an anti-globalist hero. I'm not going to take issue with any of that. I mean, I perhaps wouldn't use that language. I mean, I think that's a bit strong. I think Putin would be embarrassed if you heard you talking about him in that way. But, if you put aside the sort of rather strong emotional language that you're using, I think I think that's essentially true. MP says, with inflation, somebody's fudging the numbers.
Oh, yeah, they're all fun. I mean, I'm going to say producer prices in Germany apparently went up. Industrial producer prices in Germany went up, I think, 45%. Now, how do you square that with an inflation rate of 10%? I can't. I mean, the one just doesn't add up, because bear in mind, some of the items that are not included in producer prices are rising faster. So, I mean, it makes no sense to me. The inflation numbers make no sense to me. By the way, just on the topic of inflation, I've noticed when I go to the local groceries that we're already seeing shrinkflation now starting, in the sense that cans and jars of food are getting smaller, but are being sold at the old prices.
Mr. Wonderful says, not the greatest Gabbard fan, but if Trump can bring her around in 2 years, then the Trump-Tulsi 2024 team is a landslide.
No, possibly. Yeah, I can see that. She also, I have to say, I mean, whatever you think of Tulsi, she's also good. She's also comes across well. People see her and they like her, and that's not to be underestimated.
Sparky says, Herschel always let his actions speak for him. Thank you, Sparky, for that. Herschel Walker. Red Viking says, would love to see Steve Bannon on the Duran as well.
Well, if we can get him. I mean, it might not be that easy.
If we can get him, yeah. Not Intimidated says, my grocery bill went up about 30% over the last month in New York. Brutal. How many will get an 8.7% raise in January to match the COLA indicated for 2023?
Very few people. I mean, a few very rich people will, but most people won't. They'll see real wages are falling across the Western world.
Osaks, thank you for that super sticker. SR, thank you for that super sticker. Sharon Quidney 2 says, where are the climate change Greta clones going with energy costs going through the roof?
Oh, they're all over the place. I mean, we have in Britain, we're having lots of protests. Stop oil. The Stop Oil protests attacking Van Gogh's sunflowers, throwing soup at them. And by the way, I read a most extraordinary defence of this action by George Monbiot, who's a very much a sort of journalist in the Guardian, who supports the climate change theories and things of that kind. Anyway, he said he gave the impression he thought it was fully justified, because supposedly this issue of climate change isn't attracting enough attention. So you need to presumably threaten the sunflowers, one of the great works of Western art, one of the great iconic works of Western art, in order to give it the attention it deserves. I find that bizarre, given that on climate change for the last 20, 30 years, I've been hearing almost nothing else. At times it's been the only topic that people have been talking about. But apparently not enough for him.
Just don't mention the Nord Stream sabotage explosion. Yeah. Rahmat, thank you for that super sticker. Tata says 65% of Americans under 35 are renters. There's been a sharp decline of home ownership. We need affordable housing. For many, housing is not an asset but an expense.
Absolutely. And, you know, the same is going to start to happen in Britain, because housing in Britain is becoming increasingly unaffordable. So unless you're lucky enough to own your own home, and that, by the way, inevitably makes you of a certain age, if you're young, your chances of owning your own home is just shrinking by the month, and by the, you know, even faster now. How can they afford the mortgage costs?
Nigel Martin says, will illegal President Biden be impeached if the Republicans get the House and Senate? Greatly appreciate the Duran.
Well, Robert Barnes seemed to think that he would be. I mean, he said over the course of the programme that by June of 2023, he basically expected impeachment to be underway.
Theophrastus 3.0 says, how can a president who forgets how and where his own son died possibly stay in office? It's obvious he's mentally impaired. Why no 25th Amendment?
Well, I totally agree with that. I mean, I'm not going to, I can't answer that question. But I think we can guess that the reason he's there is because it suits people to keep him there. That's the only explanation. Either they can't find an alternative, which is difficult. They don't want Kamala in. So they keep him there for that reason, or because, you know, he's easy to control. But clearly, he should not be president. We're not the only people who say that. Even people like Byron York, who's a mainstream journalist, says that he's too old.
Joyce Skarupa says, it stems from Russiagate, COOF and MSNBC propaganda. The Democrat supporters reviled Trump and MAGA.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I completely agree. I've got nothing to add to that.
From Fair Frozen 55, speaking of Dr. Dog abuse, what's your take on Boston's 80% crate omni Varkoof? Ah, okay. Why are they allowed to do this? Okay. They mean we have to be careful on this. The Boston Lab 80% thing that they're building, well, that they've created. Yeah. Do you know the story that?
No, I don't know.
About,
I have to say, truthfully, I do not know.
80% lethal. It's like an 80% lethal COOF thing that was being cooked up in Boston.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, very disturbing. And of course,
why are they allowed to do it? Yeah.
Well, why are they allowed to do it, and why is it not being talked about more? Well, I mean, we can guess answers to both questions, but I agree this is a difficult topic, and clearly somebody has an interest, a very powerful interest, and that person, well, and persons are very powerful, and they're able to press forward with it. But I don't know enough about the story to give the inside track. Probably Robert does. Maybe we'll talk about this on another program. But it's perhaps also something, if we are going to dwell on it, we would need to do on one of our other platforms.
Yeah. Missy Kin says, am I the only one who thinks the U.S. is trying to get as many weapons to Ukraine because it's in proximity to China and they are planning a war with China?
No, I don't think you're the only one. I think lots of people think that. I mean, Brian Boletic at the New Atlas, I think, has just done a video on that very point. So I think lots of people think that, and I think you're probably right too. I mean, the belligerence of this administration towards, in every direction, is astonishing. Now, whether they really want war with China or whether they're bluffing China, which is incredibly dangerous in itself, I'm not sure. But certainly they're behaving in a most irresponsible way on every conceivable front. Ray McGovern, who is the former CIA analyst who was used to do the president's daily brief and who set up, veterans intelligence professionals for sanity with someone else, he's done a piece, a really good piece, in which he says, makes the same point that we on the Duran have made, which is that these people who run the US government at the moment, these overblown school kids who run things, they all need to be fired because they're doing things that are becoming incredibly dangerous.
Pasha Moyer says conviction after impeachment requires 67 senators. Republicans may have 53. What circumstances could conceivably convince 14 others to vote that way?
You know, I can think of a few. First of all, if there's a massive groundswell of opposition against the president, which is possible, but also it depends very much on the charge. And here I'm going to push back a bit on Robert Barnes. I'm not sure that I'm disagreeing with him, by the way, but I think that if you narrow it to the laptop, what Hunter was doing, the various allegations about Hunter, and what Biden himself has said, which is not true, then I think even for Democrats, this is so ugly that it will be very difficult to defend. And I think that in that kind of situation, what I suspect would happen is that if this thing really took off, as I think it could easily do, rather than get a vote in the Senate, you'd find the same situation as what happened with Nixon, in which you'd have a delegation from the Senate come to see the president and telling them the game's over, we can't possibly vote to acquit you, rather than go through the process of an actual impeachment, resign.
Sparky says Herschel's loyal to Georgians and his friends for 40 years, Trump. To his friends for 40 years, Trump. Hate to see the MSM rake him through the coals. The guy I knew decades ago was actually like that. First Sports Illustrated cover story. Thank you for that, Sparky. Simo Bothell, Missouri says, as a former USAF AWACS crew dog, I'm curious about airborne surveillance assets in the region. Do you know if the NATO E3s are still flying?
Yes. I mean, this is one thing I can tell you for a fact, because one of the useful things is that all these Russian telegram channels give you incredibly detailed information about what is flying where, and they are publishing all that information all the time. They don't publish information about what the Russians are doing, so you don't know very much about Russian air surveillance assets, but American ones definitely are.
Joanna says, what's the over-under on the lettuce head?
Over-under on the lettuce
Head one.
She's gone the lettuce one. Absolutely. Funny.
Alexander Pojachev says, is there a crisis with U.S. bonds and what kind of issues will it cause?
Yes, I think that there isn't yet, but everywhere. I mean, U.S. bond yields, Treasury bond yields are also rising. And the U.S. Treasury, and this has not been widely reported, is having more and more problems with its Treasury sales. Now, this is something that it's difficult to understand what a big shift that is, because for most of the time that I've known, Treasury bonds were almost as liquid as cash. I mean, it sounds, they were considered so solid, and they were in so much demand that, they were extraordinarily liquid. So the fact that both yields on these bonds are rising, and of course the corollary of that the Treasury is finding it more and more difficult to sell these things, shows that we are in the early stages, still the early stages of a crisis in the US bond market. By the way, if and when that comes, that's going to be huge.
Tatiana Carmichael, thank you for that super sticker. Dane Nobody 4, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says, wasn't it the Irish mob, not the Italian mob?
I don't know.
I
know what you're referring to. I mean, it was Robert.
It was the Irish one, I think.
Quite probably was the Irish mob. Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Deidre, thank you for that super sticker. Lema Lisovska says, what's both of your views on or about Douglas Murray?
The the thinker. I think he's a very, very clever man. I don't always agree with him, and I think sometimes, I mean, to be straightforward about it, he takes positions of a rigidity which I just can't go along with. But he's certainly a clever man, and he makes some very valid points about the general decline of our culture. I'm not sure that he's got the reasons for it right, but he's certainly somebody I always follow. I don't know what you think of him, Alex.
I don't know enough about him, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. He was you saw a lot more of him about 20, 30 years ago. I mean, he seems to be fading as perhaps some of the more the younger people are now coming.
He was cancelled, kind of, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, of course he was. that goes without saying.
Rhodesian Dream says, which option is more fraught with peril, leaving a Ukrainian rump state or being forced to administer the entire country?
I think that the Russians, when they started this thing, had no intention of administering the whole country because they understood the enormous difficulties that would involve. But I think that they're coming gradually, step by step, round to acceptance that that's going to be the outcome, and perhaps from their point of view, the best solution. Not perhaps the ideal solution, but probably the best one. And I think that they will be able to do it. I think there'll be problems, there'll be difficulties, but I think that they can do it.
Double Thinker says, and a well-deserved tip for going through articles so ridiculous that they would drive me up the wall.
Absolutely. It's
Double Thinker.
Soul-destroying exercise, can I say sometimes?
Ronald B. says, Barnes has made many videos on the rogue U.S. agencies, CIA, FBI. Are these agencies still rogue, or are they now pretty much aligned with the present administration? Actually, Robert answered that during the live stream. Zalame says, why doesn't the UK annex the rest of Ukraine, just like Russia did? The West wins as they secure Ukraine and its remaining resources for themselves. Ukraine wins because then they are part of NATO, and Russia has no legal argument against it because they just did the same thing. Russia wouldn't want Ukraine to be annexed and would try to avoid a war with NATO. UK will be in a stronger negotiating position, even if they just threatened annexation. And part two of this chat is Ukraine economy is rubbish at the moment, but with the right leadership and investment, could be a huge asset to the UK. It would also justify the current UK obsession with Ukraine. If the West refuses to negotiate with Russia, then this seems like the next best option.
If you want to turn the British people completely against the political state's obsession with Ukraine, then the way to do it is to tell them that we're going to annex a part of that country, opening the way for Ukrainian immigration into Britain and landing another massive fiscal bomb on our already defaulting economy. The reaction amongst the British people to something like that, just would not bear thinking about. There would be protests in the streets, which would make the Iraq war protests seem a minor affair by comparison. And the idea also that Britain would annex territories so close to Russia and bring themselves up against the Russian army. People in Britain might talk, brave talk about Russia when it's far away. We can have all kinds of weird and wonderful articles in the Daily Mail and on our other newspapers about the Russian army, but the reality is we have no wish to take it on. So not happening, I'm afraid.
Wood and W says, just listening. Susanna1919 says, appreciate the Duran and interesting discussions you provide. Ralph EP says, thanks for your work. Valerie NY2CNC says, Robert, are you concerned that Mark Elias will focus on suing swing states to change election laws as he did in 2020? As an election official from NC, I am very concerned.
I think he answered that one, actually. I think he is concerned, yeah. He's not, he's always there. Mark Elias is a dangerous man, in my opinion.
Envy Storm says, get that fabulous Duran hoodie everybody represents. Thank you for that, Envy Storm. Mr. Black says, Barnes, Durham's start was 10-18-18, not appointed by Barr. And don't forget CIA FBI involvement in Branch Davidian cover-up, another Durham dead end.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last point is absolutely correct. I mean, I think that Barr and Durham do go back a long way, and I accept that it wasn't Barr who first. I mean, I think Durham eventually became special counsel. I think towards the very end of the Barr's time as Attorney General, as AG. But I don't think that it's a. I think the two are joined at the hip, and I think Robert's points about that are correct.
Okay, from Chris Winans, this is obviously the most important podcast on earth right now. Thank you guys so much for all you do in bringing straight truth to us commoners. Greetings from Canada. God bless and Godspeed. Thank you, Chris, for that. Let's see. Theophrastus 3.0 says, I used to think the FBI was the law enforcement version of the Boy Scouts. Sadly, the Gestapo comparisons are starting to be more accurate.
So did I. We've gone through the same journey of discovery. I can remember as a boy, small boy, admittedly, watching a TV series called The FBI. It's a drama series, with, thinking these guys were the best police force in the world, bar none. Even Scotland Yard wasn't as good. And I went on having a lot of faith in the FBI, well, basically until Russia came.
Victoria Neeson says, keep exposing the truth. Mr. Black says, if Twitter sale is allowed, Musk is a black hat. If not allowed, then a gray-white hat. Social listening influence ops networks run out of Brovery for USA. Was never Russia. Was always Ukraps.
Well, I to be straightforward about this, I think that the Musk Twitter buy-up is looking again problematic. And there's reports he's under investigation, though I'm not even sure on what ground. He's made some tweets, and that's apparently enough for people to start, looking into him and looking as to whether or not he's buying Twitter is going to be a national security problem. I mean, the very fact that we're talking about this is astonishing. And can I just also point out that if buying Twitter is a national security issue, then you cannot argue that Twitter is just a private company. And that is important for all the reasons that we've been here discussing about, the censorship, the First Amendment issues that we've been debating so many times and have been debated so many times by so many people in light of all that's been going on Twitter and Facebook and all of these other places. Now, I'm choosing my words extremely carefully here. Now, about Musk himself, he is a complete enigma to me. I'm not going to discuss him. I don't know very much about him. I'm not able to comment on the kind of person he is.
Mr. Black says, I keep telling you guys, MBS, MBZ, Xi, Putin, Musk, others. Decision has been made. Bureaucratic empire of National Socialist states loses. No World War III and no nuclear. Purge pressure on the US, EU, 14 eyes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, it looks rather overwhelming, but anyway, let's see what happens.
Constanza says, Trump needs to bar Kushner from any of his decision-making. That was his Achilles heel during the first term.
I agree. I think that Kushner had his skills, but I think overall he was a problem. I would agree with that, actually.
Hamza, thank you for that super sticker. Dark Dragunov says, the U.S. is the new Rome. Globalism equals imperialism.
Well, I think in the conception of some people it is. Of course, the real Rome was quite different from this globalist Rome. I mean, for one thing, Romans were intensely patriotic and remained so right up to the time when their empire eventually collapsed. There was a very strong sense of the Roman people and the Roman nation, which was shared even by the elite in Rome.
Olga Sementsova says, Tulsi made a move this week, but I heard she worked with PSYOPs in the U.S. military. I hope that is wrong and she is genuine. What is your call?
I don't think she's. I think she is genuine. The only thing I would say about Tulsi is that, I mean, she does make mistakes. She's not enormously experienced. I like Tulsi. I think she's. I'm one of those people who's very sympathetic to her. I think she's fought a brave fight, but I think one mustn't make the mistake of investing too much in her. I mean, she's not a top politician. She doesn't have that weight of experience, that weight of support in the United States that would enable her to make an enormous difference. That's my own feeling about her.
Agu says, Alexander's question, how are Democrats getting away with it? It's because Rhino, neocon, Republicans, and Fox are taking the side of the Democrats against real conservatives.
So true in so many respects.
Lema Lisovska, thank you for that super sticker. Michael Harvey, thank you for that super chat. Anthony Plack says, you are missing the primary factoid of Elon Musk. His mission statement is to make humanity a multi-planetary species before nuclear war. This drives every decision he makes.
I repeat again, I mean, I find Musk a most extraordinarily complex man to understand. Maybe if we ever met, which is most unlikely, I get a better sense of him. But at the moment, I mean, I really can't understand how Musk is able to do all the things that he does and anything about him really. So I mean, I've just heard that. I didn't know about that sort of thing. But I mean, I'm not going to comment more about Musk. I don't know whether you can add anything, Alex. But I just don't understand him really.
Alex Daviduk says, my earlier super chat was deleted by the DevL because I thanked Robert for reminding me the DevL, the devil exists and we can resist. Evil is everywhere. Resist, resist, resist.
Mm-hmm. Gosh.
Thank you for that, Alex.
We've got powerful enemies.
Hex Monkey says, what can we do about all this? Being angry on YouTube and in chats is great because we become aware, but in the end, how do we fix these egregious abuses of power?
Well, this is completely true. And of course, talking is one thing, and it's not unimportant. We must never be discounted. And spreading ideas and talking about them with other people does have an effect, and it is important. But ultimately, you can only change things through political action. And I mean by that, lawful political action. And you can do that in all kinds of ways. You can do that by voting. You can do that by standing for office if you have the resources and the nerve to do that sort of thing. You can do that by campaigning for the right sort of people. And of course, and this is where Robert Barnes is the right person to contact, some people do it by bringing really important court cases, which is the one country, the United States, where people do that and can do that successfully. So lots of things you can do. I'm not going to say any one is easy.
Andrew, thank you for that super chat. Paul, thank you for that super chat. Orome Best Valar says, the price good men pay for ignoring public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. Mr. P.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. ThinkPad20 says, fun fact, the amount Alex Jones has been fined exceeds the total debt owed by the nation of Belarus to the World Bank. Thank you for that. Daily Beagle, thank you for that super sticker. CC says, out of curiosity, do you think Brits realize or understand how Anglophilic most Americans tend to be on a conscious and subconscious level?
I'm going to actually turn that round. I think a lot of British people, perhaps too many British people, believe that Americans are more Anglophilic than they actually are. There is a huge complacency here in Britain that, the Americans are somehow always, like us, that they are also very like us when they're not actually. And that, we have this connection with the Americans that nobody else supposedly does. So to answer your question, I think a lot of British people do know that there is strong Anglophilia in the US. And I think a few of them believe that it is even greater than it actually is, and that they don't understand or realise that within America too there is some resentment of Britain, and a resentment which is, I suspect, growing.
Daily Beagle, thank you for that super sticker. Bernard Hutchinson says, what insanity is going on with the Tory government in the UK?
Yeah. Where to begin? I mean, what can I say? I mean, it's such an astonishing story. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you wanted to make it up, you couldn't. I mean, if 20 years ago somebody had wanted to write a novel describing this situation, it wouldn't have sold because people have said it was too far-fetched. I mean, what I get to say is this. Ever since Margaret Thatcher fell from power back in 1990, the Conservative Party in Britain has never found a purpose, and it's never found a leader. It's gone from one leader to another. It's gone from one idea to another. It's been taken over by various factions. It's been partly infiltrated and taken over by the institutions of the permanent state. And though it is historically the dominant party in Britain and the governing party in Britain, it has ceased to function in an effective way, just as Britain is no longer functioning in an effective way. So it's a party that is cracking and breaking down as Britain cracks and breaks down around it. So that's, I think, the way to understand this. I mean, for me, Margaret Thatcher was the last true leader that the Conservative Party has ever had. All of those who followed have been inconsequential.
Sukdi says the US is the new USSR and Russia is the new US.
No, a lot of people are saying that, including in Russia, by the way.
Mikhail Flyer says, will Democrats go to war to avoid the midterms?
I think what they're going to try and do is that they're going to try and push Ukraine into even more war. There was a report in the New York Times saying that US intelligence is telling the Ukrainians that the Russian military is almost on its last legs, that Russian military formations are collapsing, and over the next 6 weeks, if they go on pushing hard, they'll be able to win some great victories. Now, everything that I am seeing points to the opposite conclusion. And Russian reporters who read that New York Times article are saying that this is clearly part of an agenda to keep Ukraine mounting offensives until it wins some sort of victory that can then be sold as a victory by the Biden administration in advance of the midterms. My own view is the American people are not interested, even if such a victory were to take place. It wouldn't change a single vote. And I don't think that Ukraine, anyway, is going to win any kind of victory like that, because I think the whole story, the whole narrative is false.
Thank you for that super chat. Annie Scott, thank you for that super chat. Karen Blennerhead, thank you for that super sticker. Johnny Alm, thank you for that super chat. McClenko says, thank you. Tones, thank you for that super chat. Mojave Ampworks says, many people feel dejected and see no solution to these corrupt politicians running our world. We must get involved at local levels, cut off their money.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ko says, do you think somebody would use nuclear weapons in Ukraine and then blame Putin for doing it?
I think that there is a very, very, very small possibility of something like that happening. There's some talk that some people in Ukraine are trying to create some kind of dirty bomb In other words, some kind of radioactive device, not an explosive device, but, something like that might happen. I still think that the US military would refuse to be involved in anything like that. And I can't imagine the British or French militaries going along with that either.
Gold Star 007 says, you guys are subliminally making me want a Duran mug. LOL. Thank you for
Go
that.
ahead and get one. Here we go.
Yes.
I wouldn't be. I'm never without one myself.
Gabor says a quotation to the margin of the midterm election. This shit would be really interesting if weren't in the middle of it, Barack Obama. Well, he would know.
He would know, indeed.
Thank you for that, Gabor, for that quote. Let's see here. Nadia says it's all a scripted play on both sides, the grand chessboard.
Yeah, well, I think scripted up to a point, in that it's increasingly clear to me that the sides, one side in particular, is losing control of its moves. They're starting to do things which they didn't plan to do, and which are becoming increasingly dangerous for them.
Novus Black says, useless super chat, but one thing that struck me this night was that without power and such, we could see steam trains make a return. I like steam trains.
I like steam trains too. I remember them. When I was a child in Europe in the 60s, they still existed.
Novus Black says, and also when the U.S. will call it a special military operation. Thank you for that. Novus Black says, I like to dream about the U.S. being disconnected from SWIFT, getting sanctioned to hell, have their pipelines blown up, and Haiti being pumped full of weapons by foreign nations when the U.S. invades Haiti.
Well, I wouldn't want to see any of those things, to be honest. No. I mean, I wouldn't want that to be done to the US. But, I take your point and understand the point you're making. And I think it's a good point.
Novus Black says, UN, also known as the United States Puppet Nations.
Yeah. I mean, the agencies of the UN have entirely been taken over, it seems to me, by the State Department.
And Nadia says, wow, maybe we should instead help the people take down the evil global governance.
Yeah, agreed.
Where are we here? Mr. Black says, she worked with Bernie, and Bernie is handled by Kilimnik, and even HRC emails shows she knew he was Russian-controlled. Tulsi is a misdirection.
Well, I don't think she's a misdirection. I think she's probably been naive in her past and made mistakes. But again, I want to stress again, I don't think one should overinvest hopes in her. I don't think it's fair on her to do that, by the way. I mean, she can... She's somebody who says a lot of good things. I don't imagine that she will ever achieve seriously important office in the United States.
Marud Hamuda says, thanks, gentlemen. Could Moscow be purposefully prolonging the SMO to demilitarize and de-economize the West after seeing the West's reaction to their SMO, after seeing the West send limitless arms and cash to Kiev?
Lots of people are saying that, including, by the way, in Russia itself. I don't think so. I think that the Russians were not seeking to conduct the SMO in that way when they started. I think they were trying to leave the door open for negotiations. I think what's happened over the last few weeks, since the Kharkiv counteroffensive to be precise, and with the Samarkand summit, that they've now decided that they have to bring this war to an end and fight it as a war, and they've had the green light from their allies to do it.
North Monk 03 says, you guys are the best, and these and the most informative information-packed shows on the internet. As far as I'm concerned, love and respect, guys.
Thank you
for that, North Monk. Lakeva, thank you for that super chat. Antar Das says, why do we see these big protests across Europe but nothing ever happens?
Well, does it surprise you? Because, of course, if there's big protests, but they can't get any traction within the political class, if the political class closes ranks against them, if it launches the riot police against them, they will go on making the decisions that they do. And if elections are constantly distorted, and if political leaders who challenge the political class are marginalized and ruined in the ways that, say, Sebastian Kurz has recently been in Austria, I mean, protests can only take you so far. What you need is more than protests. You need a strong political movement behind you. One of the reasons why Orban in Hungary is so strong is that because behind Orban there is Fidesz, which is a powerful political movement in Hungary, a solid one. And in Europe, elsewhere in Europe, no such movement exists. Certainly we don't have anything like that in Britain. And in Germany, the AfD is far too divided within itself to provide a kind of solid base to challenge the political class in the way that one would need.
Sparky says, remember Tulsi told me she got into politics only in an effort to get Alexander McCurse's attention.
Oh, well, she certainly got my attention, but I'm sure that wasn't the reason she went into politics.
CC says, I read convincing theories about the role the EU states played in the sabotage, especially one involving Danish forces. I find it hard to believe the US was alone.
Well, I agree with that. I'm pretty sure that it was not alone, but I'm also pretty sure that it played the dominant role.
Fato says, Robert Alexander, did Kanye West opened a Pandora's box with the attacks to J Media?
I think that's more a question for Robert than me. I don't know.
And with that, we will end this Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for all your questions. Take care.
And a brilliant session with Robert Barnes altogether, in my opinion.